Okay, I think we're going to get started. And I'm Naomi Schachter, and I head international relations at the National Library of Israel. And first of all, everyone who's joined us, I hope that you are feeling well right now, you, your family, friends, and larger picture managing during this difficult time. I want to welcome you to the first of what will be a series of private events, private library events, where we will extend invitations to the library's special circle of friends. This is separate. I should add that the library has a very extensive series of cultural events. Most of them are in Hebrew, some are in English. It is worth clicking in and checking what's going on. You know, one of the silver linings is that you too can now participate in the library's rich cultural programming. I want to extend a special welcome to the international members of the library who are here, and I would like Aviva to wave your hand for those who can see the faces here. Aviva is the coordinator of our member relations, and you have heard from her, you hear from her by email with updates. I want to welcome many members of our NLI USA board, as well as some other invited guests. I also want to thank Doron. Doron Levin is the coordinator is the producer of the cultural events at large for the library, and this evening as well, which is slightly higher scale than just regular, definite higher scale, not slightly, than just a regular home Zoom event, the kind that I would organize, for example. So this event, as I said, is the first in a series of events. The next one will be in 2 weeks on May 17th. Dr. Raquel Ukeles, the curator of our Islam and Middle East collection, in honor of Ramadan, will be speaking about sacred time, a comparison of Islamic and Jewish time. That will be followed a few weeks later by Dr. Stefan Litt, bringing you into the inside story on the Kafka collection. The Kafka-esque saga at the library, anecdotes, the collection, highlights, stories, and it will certainly be very interesting. You will get invitations, so please stay tuned to getting those invitations. And now it is my honor to welcome our featured speaker, Dr. Yoel Finkelman. Yoel is the curator of the Haim and Hanna Salomon Judaica collection at the National Library of Israel. He was formerly a lecturer at Bar Ilan University in contemporary Jewish studies, taught at Batei Midrash around Jerusalem. He's the author of Strictly Kosher Reading, Popular Literature, and the Condition of Contemporary Orthodoxy. It's a privilege to work closely with Yoel, and I am continually impressed and moved by his knowledge, skills, and talents. And Yoel, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Nomi. I hope everybody can hear me. And it's always a pleasure to get introduced by Nomi because it boosts my ego. I want to thank everybody for taking some time this afternoon or evening, as the case may be, to listen to this kind of obscurity. But I actually think Jewish magic is not quite as obscure as I was certainly led to believe in the course of my Jewish education. And I think it's actually modern Western Jews who think of magic as kind of backwater, non-Jewish even, idolatrous, religiously problematic. I think we're actually the outliers in the course of Jewish history, and magic has had a pretty important pride of place in in Jewish thinking as it has in human experience throughout human history. And what I kind of want to do is take a look at a couple of models of how Jewish magic has worked. I want to talk about adjuration texts. I want to talk about Kabbalistic magic. I want to talk about Sefer Yetzirah and letter magic. And I want to talk about demons, and particularly tell my favorite ghost story from Jewish history. And try to get a sense, largely based on items from the National Library of Israel's collection, of what kinds of forms Jewish magic has taken. And let me see if I can convince the PowerPoint to move, because it doesn't seem real excited to do that. Here we go. So first of all, actually, to all of the participants today, I want to take a moment to introduce someone who I've never met, but I've spoken to a bunch of times, and we've developed a nice friendship over the years. Eleanor Coe, and that's her hand in the first slide in the picture on the right. And Eleanor, can you unmute yourself and say hi for a minute?
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, and it's a privilege, and I'm so excited to see what I think you're going to talk about in a minute. So,
okay. Well, you can fill us in on some of the more personal details in a second, but I got a call, not actually from Eleanor, from a woman named Stacy Darby, who works professionally helping families develop printed family histories. It's a way of kind of older generations passing along the stories and messages of their family, the family's history, the places they've come from, the things that they've cared about, so that the further generations, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, have something to hold on to in terms of their past. And Stacy had been working with Eleanor and her family on a family history. And over the course of their work, this little, if you can see my cursor, this suitcase popped up in the discussion. And Eleanor will correct me if I get the details of the story wrong. But her father, Eleanor's father, Max Brodny, had been a prominent physician and had gone with a group of physicians to check out the Soviet medical system in the 1950s and some of the first commercial flights between the United States and the Soviet Union in the heart of the Cold War. And I'm sure that they got a perfectly honest and straightforward vision of the Soviet medical system to bring back and teach in the United States how to do things. And among other things, Max visited a synagogue in Moscow, still semi-functioning in the 50s. And a rabbi, we haven't identified who he is, called him over, brought him to a side room, and showed him this suitcase, and said, and again, Eleanor, correct me if I'm telling the story the way you did, said, these items in this suitcase are important. You have to get them out of here. They have no place in today's Soviet Union. You have to take them. You have to protect them. But be careful because you're being watched, and we're being watched. And Max took the suitcase, brought it back with him to the United States, where he kept it in a cabinet. And after he passed, he passed it along to his daughter Eleanor, who had kept it herself in a cabinet, and it showed it to various people over the course of the years, many of whom said, no, it's not really terribly significant. You don't really have to make much of this. And until Stacy, who was working on this family history, took a look at this and got extremely excited. She had a fairly extensive Jewish education. She spoke with some professors who she had studied with in England, who put her in touch with the Gershom Shalom collection of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism at the library, and eventually got to me. And we were able to identify the suitcase as containing more than 80 rolled up amulets in Hebrew characters, mostly in Hebrew-Aramaic with a little bit of Judeo-Arabic thrown in. Judeo-Arabic is the Arabic language in Hebrew characters. And as well as another item, which we'll see later on in the presentation, a notebook, probably older than the amulets themselves, containing hundreds and hundreds of magical recipes. What to do in case of plague, that's very timely, what to do in case of impotence, how to sneak into neighbors' houses without being seen to steal or to take back what belongs to you, either even some violent and attack recipes for how to attack and cause death in your enemies. There is a lot of animal dung, a lot of words to say, a lot of things to burn, and a lot of thoughts to think as you're doing all of these rituals. And so based on the photos that that Eleanor and Stacy were able to show us, including these photos here, we were able to kind of identify these as being probably late 19th, early 20th century, mostly North African amulets. And they're rolled up largely so that people can wear them around their necks as for some kind of protection, or keep them in a pouch in their pocket or on their bodies at all times in order to keep protected. How these North African amulets ended up in the Soviet Union in Moscow before they were brought to the United States, I cannot say. I could speculate. It's possible that there was a North African collector. It's possible that there was it's possible that this is something related to Chabad, to the Lubavitch movement, who was active at the time in North Africa and in Moscow. There are several possibilities. It could have been a researcher who had collected this material. It's really very difficult to know how they got there. And after much discussion, back and forth, Eleanor decided, and we very much appreciate this, to donate this collection to the library. And there was quite a bit of press report, and we've since cataloged them much more carefully and added them to the manuscript collection, including caring for the suitcase itself, which is certainly part of the story. And what we get just by looking at this essentially almost random collection of 80 plus amulets of various kinds and sizes on paper, on parchment, is a sense that these were objects that people kind of used on a day-to-day basis. And lest you be tempted with a certain kind of an Orientalist approach to say, well, okay, I understand, and again, I'm saying this not to accept it, but something somebody might think, well, the kind of backwards, unmodern North African Jews might have been into this sort of thing, but the rational modern European Jews would not have been. No, that is certainly not the case. Until early modernity, the early modern period, Jews around the world were involved in amulets. And certainly in Eastern Europe until quite late into the 20th century. We have in our collection, which we acquired in the last couple of years, a similar book of magical recipes from New York from the 1930s. So these are sorts of things that modern Jews were quite involved in. And I understand that there has been quite a trade in amulets, certainly in the last few months within Jewish communities and also outside of Jewish communities. And the reticence to think about Judaism in light of magic stems obviously from the verses in Deuteronomy. Let no one be found among you who consigns his son or daughter to the fire, or who is an augur or a soothsayer or a diviner or a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or one who consults ghosts or familiar spirits, or one who inquires of the dead. For anyone who does such things is abhorrent to the Lord. This is the verse in Deuteronomy. We can find similar verses in Exodus, Machashefa lo techayeh, you should not allow a witch to live. But at the same time, if we look carefully, even through the Bible itself, we might discover examples of things that look on the surface to be examples of magic. For example, the verses here in Numbers, the Israelites are in the desert. They have sinned against the Lord. Their punishment is serpents which have attacked them. And God appears to Moses and he says, make a copper serpent, mount it on a standard. And when anyone who was bitten by the serpent, he would look at the copper serpent and recover. It looks like magic, smells like magic, acts like magic. Maybe it is magic. And of course, the rabbinic midrashim later go to great ends to try to suggest that this is not magic, of course, that this was Well, when they looked up at the copper serpent, they would see the sky, and the sky is blue, and it would remind them of heaven and would remind them of God and sanctity. And there's a series of biblical examples there where such things, where the Midrash, where the later rabbis tried to uproot the magical interpretation because they were uncomfortable with that magic interpretation. But the work that they had to do that suggests that, at least on the surface, there's some reason to think that there's something magical involved, even not that this is in and of itself a proof, but the tefillin, or even the mezuzah put on the front door, words, sacred words put on the front door or wrapped around the body, are the kinds of things that in many cultures had magical powers. And even to this day, you'll find among observant Jews the notion that if a series of calamities happen to a family or unfortunate events happen to a family, perhaps they should check their mezuzot. Perhaps they should check and make sure that their mezuzot are kosher and proper on the doorpost. And that certainly hints at some connection between these words that are written on a scroll and wrapped up and put at the front door, and kind of looks kind of like protection. Now the rabbis were a little bit uncomfortable with this notion of magic, but they had a problem, and it's a problem that it's very, very difficult to solve. I'm not familiar with any totally adequate solution. And that is that we basically don't have any idea what magic is and what magic isn't. Magic is extraordinarily difficult to define because what's the difference between magic and technology? I mean, we're all behaving in ways to prevent invisible creatures that most of us don't actually understand from invading our bodies and the bodies of our loved ones. And we wear funny clothing, and we wash our hands with great regularity. And at least something about the surface of why we do that is understandable to us, but not the details. Unless we happen to be microbiologists, or unless we happen to be epidemiologists, we understand that there is some expert out there who can guide us in the proper way to protect us from these invisible creatures. And we follow their rules with some measure of understanding. And there's a sense that if we just follow these rules mechanically, then we will succeed in annihilating this invisible enemy. And we start to see from describing it, I think, in those terms, that there's some similarity between magic and technology, especially in an age where most people didn't really have the knowledge to understand how things really work. And we'll get more into this a little bit later on, but in some ways it might be possible to suggest that magic is technology that doesn't work, or that's embedded in a system of understanding that doesn't really work. The problem is, of course, that the practitioners of magic don't know that it doesn't work. They think that it does. And therefore, magic often functions much as technology. And especially in an age where all of medicine had a certain kind of magical element to it, where all of medicine involved certain kinds of behaviors that most people didn't really understand in any scientific way. So how do I figure out what the border is between illegitimate, prohibited magic, as the Bible says, on the one hand, and simply going to the doctor and getting ground up leaves or some such? And we have here a passage in the Talmud in Sanhedrin, the Babylonian Talmud, 67b. I'm going to read the last section because it really gets at this problem of trying to figure out the borders between good magic and bad magic. If everybody's doctor looks like what we would call magic, then how do I know what's prohibited and what's acceptable? Abaye said the halachot of sorcery, the laws of sorcery, are categorized like the halachot of Shabbat. There are some of them for which one is liable to be executed by stoning. There are some of them which one is exempt from punishment, but they are prohibited. And there are some of them that are permitted ab initio. You are allowed to do them in principle. In other words, there are three categories of sorcery, of magic. There's the really bad magic, the semi-bad magic, and the good magic. One who performs a real act of sorcery is liable to be executed by stoning. So if you really do magic, then you're punishable by death. One who deceives the eyes, one who does some kind of fake magic, is exempt from punishment, but it's prohibited for him to do so. What is permitted ab initio is to act like Rabbi Hanina and Rav Oshia. Every Shabbat Eve, they would engage in the study of the laws of creation, and a third-born calf would be created for them, and they would eat it and honor Shabbat. A wonderful way to cut down on your butcher bill. But notice, if we look at this passage in the Talmud, we discover that the Talmud here has these three categories, and I, for one, can't figure out the difference between them, and I'm not the only one. The classic medieval commentators struggle greatly to try to figure out what the difference is. How do I know whether somebody's doing real sorcery, which is prohibited? One is just deceiving the eyes, doing some kind of sleight of hand trick that makes you think that they're doing something magical, but they aren't. And somebody who's using the legitimate magic of the Jewish esoteric legacy. How could I possibly know the difference? How could the rabbis have known the difference? And certainly, how could a layperson wandering around trying to cure him or herself of a disease, trying to protect themselves from the dangers of childbirth or from economic tribulations, how could the layperson know the difference? We have here three categories, but I'm not sure what they are, and the rabbis struggle. Maimonides, the rationalist, is famous for his distinction between science, what he considered science, and sorcery, but even he struggles to offer a good, clear definition. And some of the later medieval rabbis simply adopt a position which actually, I think, was likely what actually mattered over the course of history, which is their magic is bad, our magic is good. If you go to one of those idolatrous tribes and you use their magic, well, that's terrible. That's punished by stoning. But if you go to a good Jewish doctor who does very similar things using very similar techniques, well, that's just fine. That's just medicine, or even using the Jewish mystical lore to get a positive benefit. Notice also that this Talmudic passage assumes, certainly as did the Babylonian Talmud, somewhat less so the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud assumes that magic is real. I mean, they have this story here about Rav Hanina and Rav Oshia, and notice that this isn't just a hypothetical story about their ability to create a young calf, but that they would actually sit down and eat it for Shabbat. They would eat it for their meals. So the Talmud here is apparently assuming that magic is quite real and works, but that there's some distinction between the good and the bad. So we end up in this system where magic and technology kind of share. They're goal-oriented. They want to accomplish something. They have a very specific goal they want to accomplish. I want to protect this woman in childbirth, and I can use antibiotics, or I could use magical spells. They're manipulative. They're trying to get powerful forces that are in some ways more powerful than me to get them to behave in ways that I want them to. They're mechanical. If I do it right, it ought to work. If my cell phone is not succeeding, or if the Zoom technology doesn't succeed in getting us to hear each other from a far distance, well, we're going to assume that there's some mechanical explanation for that. It's not that God has decided that he doesn't like the topic of this class, and therefore he's going to bring it to an end. So there's something mechanical about it, right? Like in the famous scene from the Harry Potter movies. If it's not Leviosa, it's Leviosa. If you pronounce the spell right, it ought to work. So there's something mechanical about it. It's impersonal. It's not something that depends on, it's not like prayer in that sense, where I'm trying to convince God to that he likes me and ought to take care of me and ought to protect me. It's coercive. It has power over. If I wash my hands with soap or use hand cleanser, it will destroy the viruses on my hands, like it or not. And if I use this spell properly, then I will in fact become invisible. It's not up to anybody's choice. And often these have short-term and defined goals. There's something that I really want to accomplish today. I want to see this baby born properly. I want to see me and my family not get afflicted, or I want to have a Zoom meeting in which we can all hear each other from far away. So there's a lot of overlap here between magic and technology. And again, it could very well be that magic, the difference between magic and technology is just technology is magic that works. Maybe not much else. So I want to now spend some time talking about different kinds of magic. The first kind we're going to talk about are adjuration texts. Adjuration texts are ones in which the individual or the magician, using words spoken or written, commands a supernatural force. The word supernatural is terribly problematic here, but I'm going to use it because since I don't know a good definition of magic, so I'm going to have to use a bad definition, and supernatural will include that bad definition. But the magician or the person commands the supernatural force to behave in a certain way for our ends. These are the oldest items in the library. These are magical incantation bowls from today what we would call Iraq, 5th to 7th century, prior to the Muslim conquest, often written, mostly, about 2/3 of the ones that we have in the world. There are about 2,000 plus of them in the world. The National Library currently owns 7, and we're in the process of receiving a very large gift of another 216 of these bowls, which will really turn the library into a center of ancient Jewish magic research. And you can see there's a text in Hebrew characters in circles going around the inside of the bowl. And here in the inside of the bowl, we have a very childish image of a demon. And we can't quite see it at this resolution, but the demon's legs are tied. And the idea is that this bowl is planted upside down underneath the entrance to the home, and it works like a demon trap in the same way that if we saw a bee, we might overturn a cup over it to protect ourselves. So we overturn this ceramic bowl, and it traps the demons underneath and ties them up. And we have several examples here. And here also, this one is less professionally done. This is not in Hebrew characters. This is in Mandaic characters, but you can also see over here the image of the bound demon with the big alligator-like mouth over here. And I'm just going to read the translation of the text, originally in Aramaic. Lilith, of course, is the terrible, evil, seductress female demon. For that Lilith who dwells with Yawatai, daughter of Hattai, in the fullness of thy triumph, thou did cast the rebels down, thou did let loose thy fury. It consumed them like chaff. By the power of the Great One, and by the command of the angels, and by the name of the Lord Bagdana Aziza. Bagdana Aziza is the great king of demons, the great one of the gods, and the king, head of 60 kingdoms, whose power is the power of a blast, whose heat is the heat of fire, whose practice is the practice of slaying, right? The magician is turning to Bagdana Aziza and saying, you are this all-powerful creature. His head is the head of a lion. His molar teeth are the molar teeth of a she-wolf. You are this incredibly strong creature. There came the Lord. There came the troop. He came against them, against the demons, against the Jews, against the evil Lilith. And basically, this is an adjuration text. This is a text in which the magician and the owner command the powerful heavenly force, Bagdana Aziza, to attack the evil heavenly force of Lilith to protect the family. Adjuration texts, like the amulets that we saw from Eleanor's suitcase, they're self-identified as amulets, or a kamea, or an incantation, or an adjuration, hashpa'ah. They're identified often. They use the terms like that. They're a direct appeal to the supernatural power, in our case, Bagdana Aziza. They're often addressed in the first person singular, although the example we just saw is largely in the third person. There's often terms that reflect an oath or a promise, including threats, but it's not a request. This is not please. This is not prayer. It is, I command you. I force you to take an oath that you will protect. It's often in the name of. Often the identification of the specific individual is to be protected. And there are specific tools that threaten demons. Here, I'm basing myself largely on Yuval Harari, the less famous Yuval Harari, not the one who wrote History of Humanity. What's it called? A book that I personally didn't like all that much, but I did very much like the other Yuval Harari's Jewish Magic Before the Rise of
Sapiens.
Kabbalah. Yeah, Sapiens. Thank you. So this kind of summary of adjuration text is largely based on him. Here we have another example of an incantation bowl where the image of the demon looking like he's wearing some kind of a space helmet over here is particularly clear. And here you can see the way in which the feet are tied up with some kind of a rope toward the bottom. But we shouldn't think of amulets as the kinds of things that are exclusively ancient. You don't have to go back to the 5th, 7th century to find amulets. Here's an 1855 one based on Lurianic Kabbalah, and of course a close-up of one of the amulets from Eleanor's collection, written in a very clear, on paper, and a very clear, mostly in a very clear North African square script. And I want to point to a couple of things. These characters are Hebrew characters that are meant to be read only by demons, only by angels and demons. Supernatural forces can read this kind of a script, and therefore commands to those angels are often written in that script. And here we see the kind of day-to-day use of them. This is a refuah here at the top line, refuah al shem, for healing in the name of, and we see over here in the top, Siliman ibn Simcha, Siliman, Shlomo, the Arabic for Shlomo, for Solomon, the son of Simcha. Simcha is probably a woman's name. And it looks like this was an amulet that was originally used for a brother and then became a hand-me-down amulet to the other brother, because they crossed out Solomon's brother's name, presumably when he grew out of it, got himself a new amulet, died, I have no idea, but they just handed this amulet down to the other brother. Here down at the bottom you have the names of the angels which are meant to protect, Gavriel, Barbiel, Tsuriel, Asmariel, Aspamiel, names of angels who are meant to do the protection. And so we have this similar kind of adjuration text in which in which the magician turns to the angels and asks for protection. Here's another example also from Eleanor's collection, although this one is more of a Kabbalistic amulet. It doesn't so much turn to the heavenly forces of angels as much as it uses Kabbalistic forces. We're not going to get too deeply into the nitty-gritty of Kabbalah, but suffice it to say that in theurgic Kabbalah, the core ideas of Kabbalah is that emanating out of the infinite God are these sphirot, are these divine powers, or these divine aspects. And the interplay between these 10 sphirot, between these 10 divine aspects, has a direct influence on what happens in the world. And to kind of oversimplify quite a bit, if the divine attribute of justice is extremely strong, so we might expect wars or drought or punishment. And if the divine aspect of chesed, if the divine aspect of kindness is particularly strong, so then we would expect economic growth and peace and health. And so there is this possibility of by drawing out the map of these spherotic forces, which is again part of what we see here, is a map of spherotic forces. So we can influence those spherotic forces and therefore influence the world. Very simple imprinted amulet. This is 18th century for a really, really beautiful. I don't see the date here, but I'm just looking at it. I'm guessing it's Amsterdam or Northern Europe. And here you kind of see the image of the woman in her birthing bed up here at the top. And there are the names of 3 protective angels, Sanoi, San Sanoi, V'Saman Galaf, the three protective angels, which according to Sefer Raziel HaMalach, an early modern magical text that probably has roots going back further, defines these as three angels who the demons cannot overcome. And then at the bottom, Adam Chava Chutz Lilit. Adam and Eve are invited into the birthing woman's room. Chutz Lilit, but the evil demoness Lilith is to be kept out. And this would just be hung in the nursery or in the bedroom of the birthing woman to use the powers of Sanoi Saman Galaf to protect the woman from the dangers of childbirth. And we could keep going. This is Jerusalem, 1874. This is a 19th century beautiful handwritten manuscript on parchment. Also here you can see toward the bottom, Sanoi Saman Galaf, the same names of the angels, Adam v'Chava Chutz Lilit, in the corners with all kinds of astrological signs and letter combinations. Wonderful example of a decorated amulet from the 19th century. Now, another way in which Judaism adopts magic, not only in terms of adjuration texts and Kabbalah by manipulation of the spherotic forces, is letter manipulation. And also, I'm giving these categories, but they end up not really breaking down one-to-one. It's not like, any given text is going to be exclusively one kind. Often these things are mixed up in various ways, but the core of letter manipulation is going to go back to this book, Sefer Yetzirah, which is quite an ancient book. This is the first printing from the National Library of Israel's collection, 1562. Many mystical books were printed in the middle of the 16th century, and Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism was kind of, much of its tradition had been underground or secret or esoteric, and then it was began to be printed in the middle of the 16th century, which had a great influence on how many people were able to become aware of this material. Now, the core idea of Sefer Yetzirah, here's a Iranian Azerbaijani manuscript from 1617 from our collection of Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. So you can see that even after printing, it was something that somebody would copy by hand and even decorate up to a point. The key, going back to the book of Genesis, is that in Genesis, God creates the world through speech. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So God creates the world. The metaphor for creation in Genesis chapter 1 is speech. And here, this Sefer Yetzirah, this ancient book, describes the idea of creation through letters. 22 foundation letters, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. He, meaning God, engraved them, he carved them, he permuted them, he weighed them, he transformed them. And with them, he depicted all that was formed and all that would be formed. 22 foundation letters. He engraved them with voice, he carved them with breath, he set them into the mouth in 5 places. How so? He permuted them, weighed them, and transformed them, Aleph with them all, and all of them with Aleph. Aleph is combined with every imaginable letter, and all of those are combined with Aleph. Bet with all of them, and all of them with Bet. They repeat in a cycle and exist in 231 gates. It comes out that all that is formed and all that is spoken emanates from one name. God speaks the letters, he combines the letters, and he forms substance out of chaos, made non-existence into existence, carved great pillars from air that cannot be grasped. Creation itself, according to the book of creation, this ancient Jewish text, is itself just the divine manipulation of letters. And it goes almost without saying that if God could manipulate and create the universe with letters, that we human beings, if we know how to manipulate letters properly, then we can also create and uncreate. Just a word about the 231 gates here. This is a simple mathematical equation. If there are 22 Hebrew letters, then there are 22 times 21 possible permutations of 2 letter combinations. And if you don't care about the order, then you chop that in half and you're left with 231. There's a bunch of other systems we'll see in another text in a second. 221, there's a lot of different letter combination systems, but the core idea is that letter combinations, the core building blocks of existence and creation, is one letter combined with another letter, creating a 2-letter combination. There then become 231 possible two letter combinations, and these are the building blocks of existence. So then you get into, well, it's really just an example, but it could be, here we have a guide to creating a golem, based on the works of Eliezer of Worms, an Ashkenazi medieval rabbi who was very interested in mysticism, number combinations, and magic. And this is a manuscript from the 17th century of his works, and you can see already over here, up here in the corners, whoops, didn't mean to do that, up here in the corners, letter combinations in square letters, and then the text down here, we have Av, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. The letter combinations are key in this text. It looks almost like a Gemara or a Mishnah or a Chumash with the commentary, in which the commentary is surrounding these various kinds of letter combinations. Well, let's take a look at one combination, one text of Sefer Yetzirah, Gershom Shalom, whose archive and collection we have in the library, talks about the commentary on Sefer Yetzirah about how to make a golem. As they used to say when I was young on television, do not try this at home, boys and girls. But if you know what you're doing, then maybe it actually works. They make a circle around the creatures and talk around the circle and recite the 221 alphabets. It's not 231 here. It's a slightly different set of letter combinations. And some say that the Creator put power into the letters, so that a man makes a creature from virgin earth and kneads it and buries it in the ground, draws a circle and a sphere around the creature, and each time he goes around it, he recites one of the alphabets. This he should do 442 times. This is a time-consuming process. If he walks forward, the creature rises up alive by virtue of the power inherent in the recitation of the letters. But if he wishes to destroy what he has made, he goes around backwards, reciting the same alphabets from end to the beginning. If you recite the letter combinations forward, this virgin earth buried in the ground rises up to be a human being. And if you walk backwards and recite the letter combinations backwards, then the creature dies. The creature sinks to the ground of itself and dies. And so it happened to Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha, or some rabbi, with his students who busied themselves with the book of Yetzirah and by mistake went around backwards until they themselves, by the power of the letters, sank into the earth up to their navels. They were unable to escape and cried out. Their teacher heard them and said to them, recite the letters of the alphabets and walk forwards instead of going backwards as you have been doing. They did so and were released. So not only do we have the mechanism by which you can do these letter combinations and create a golem, there's also this warning that you're playing with fire here and don't mess with it. If you really don't know what you're doing, you're likely to find yourself on the verge of being drowned up to the earth in a kind of quicksand situation if your expert magician doesn't come to save you. And it kind of echoes here of Mickey Mouse in Fantasia, who is saved at the last minute from trying to do magic that he's not qualified for. The Sorcerer's Apprentice kind of thing. But also notice that unlike stories we might be familiar with about golems, this text, as Shalom glosses it, it's not about doing anything with this creature. It's not like the creature is going to defend you or do tasks, or it's just to see if you can do it. It's like almost like a chemistry set. And what do I have the ability using letter combinations to create a humanoid creature? I'm running out of time, so we're going to skip more. But later on, the brothers Grimm give versions of golem stories, which eventually turn into a whole series of golem stories in the 19th and 20th century associated with Maharal of Prague and etc. But I do want to end with what is absolutely my favorite ghost story and demon story in the history of Jewish literature. We're looking at a book called Kav HaYashar, The Straight Measure, which is a book of Musar, a book of proper behavior. This is the Hebrew and Yiddish version from 1705. It was extremely popular in the early modern period. And he tells the following story, which rather than read, I'm going to tell in my own terms because I like telling this story. We're talking about an event, he says in the beginning of this chapter, I want to tell you why it's so important to avoid demons in general and attractive female demons in particular. He's talking to men, so the female demons are the real issue. He says, let me tell you the story about what happened in Posen. Because in Posen, there was this stone house, and there was a basement in the stone house, and the basement was boarded up. But at some point, a young man went down into the basement, and then he turned up dead. He went through the boarded up basement, and then he was found dead. And what this translation calls the foreign ones. The demons who were living in the basement came up from the basement, and they made a mess of the house. They would fill the pots with dust and dirt. They came into the bedrooms, threw things on the floor, ruined the food. The family is not sure what to do. The dead son is lying on the stairs. The demons are making a mess of the house. And so they go to the local Baal Shem, the local magical healer. In this case, Rav Yoel of Zamost. And he tries to convince the demons to leave the poor family alone, and they won't. In another version of this story, in some versions of this story, after giving up on the rabbi, they go to the local Jesuit priest, who also fails to get the demons out. And at some point, the Baal Shem, the magical healer, is able to understand that the demons are claiming to be rightful owners of the basement. And they insist on going to court to demonstrate that these demons living in the basement have legal deed to the basement, and they are entitled to live there, and that's why it was boarded up. And so off they go to the court. The demons show up to court. Of course, they can't be seen, but they can be heard. They go to the local rabbinical court, and the demons make the following claim. They said the original owner of this house, say the demons, had been a goldsmith, and he had a long-time affair with a female demon. And he had children. He fathered children with this beautiful female demon. And his wife did not know about the affair. And at one point on Passover evening, the husband went out to the outhouse and didn't come back quickly enough. So his wife came out in the middle of the Passover Seder, looked through the hole in the outhouse, and saw that the outhouse had been magically transformed into a beautiful bedroom. And there she saw her husband in the embrace of this beautiful, scantily clad, sexy, naked female demon. And of course, she realizes that her husband is having an affair with this demon. She's very upset. She goes to the rabbi. The rabbi puts an end to the affair. And so it seems that was the end of the story within our story, except that as the goldsmith lay on his deathbed, his children, the half human, half demons, came to him and said, you're our father. You can't abandon us. What are we going to do when you're gone? And so the father agreed to give the demons the basement to live in for the rest of eternity. And so, said the demons in court, that's why we are the legal owners of the basement. The son had no right to invade our territory, and if you just give us the basement, we'll leave the family alone. The rabbinic court sat, considered the discussion, and came to the almost inevitable conclusion that the demons have no right to live in the basement. They're not really human. They belong out in the fields and out in the garbage heaps, and they have no business in the basement. And once the rabbis determined that the legal claim of the demons to the basement was fraudulent or was inadequate, so then when the Baal Shem, when the magical healer came back, he was able to find an amulet that was able to remove them from the basement, and everybody lived happily ever after, except for the lesson that we all learn from this, which is to stay away from demons in general and promiscuous female demons in particular. I have no doubt that as much as Rabbi Kaidenever, in writing this story, really genuinely wanted us to avoid sleeping with attractive demons, I think he also was trying to entertain us and just tell us what is certainly a kind of just plain old funny story. Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes left for questions. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them. You can mute yourself at this point.
Maybe we can get rid of the presentation and just have this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does anybody have any questions for Yoel or comments? Don't be shy. Okay, well, I want to thank Yoel. And Yoel, I heard you give a similar presentation when we were together in Cleveland.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please.
I just want to say I totally enjoyed your presentation, and I think I'm going to look in the library and find some books, actually on Kindle, because I want to read more about it. So I want to thank you.
That is the best thanks I could get. Thank you, Judith.
My pleasure.
I want to thank you. I'm so honored that the amulets have had such an important role. And
it's really been our pleasure to learn about them and care about them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was wonderful when we received that. And the suitcase itself is a very, very special and cool item. And I enjoyed meeting you, Eleanor, when I was in Chicago.
Well, we will meet again.
Yeah, that was great. And I want to thank everybody for joining. And Yoel, of course, for the fascinating presentation. And to remind you that we will be sending an invitation 2 weeks from today. Dr. Raquel Ugeles will speak about sacred time, comparison of Jewish and Islamic time in honor of the month of Ramadan. And a few weeks later, we will have a Kafka talk. And so we will send you invitations, and we look forward to your participating, and don't hesitate to be in touch about anything. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.